Hey everybody, welcome back. Well, we're nearing the midpoint of November right now when I'm filming this video. And so with that, I wanted to talk about some of the rut strategies that I think about and that I use, something for you guys to consider as you're picking your next stand locations. You know, if you're still out there trying to fill that buck tag of yours. So, you know, a lot of you guys have watched my prior videos where I talk about, that peak daylight rut movement, peak daylight movement for the oldest bucks, peak times, things like that. And, it's really useful data. If we look at that graph, it's November 11th right now when I'm filming this. It's actually Veterans Day. So thank you to all the veterans out there who have served our country. And then looking at this graph that I've produced over years and years of trail camera data, we see that activity really starts to fall off around this time of year. I'm hoping this video uploads around, November 12th or 13th by the time you're watching this. But you can see we get that sharp decrease in activity in my trail camera photos. But remember, these cameras are in my real remote rut funnel locations for the most part, those big woods, public land, rut funnel type settings. So doesn't mean the bucks have disappeared. Doesn't mean they went anywhere else. They're still out there moving around. We're actually right now at the peak of the breeding bell curve. So there's different studies out there. People will debate, give or take a day here and there on what the peak day is. But let's just, for all intents and purposes, let's say it's centered around November 11th or 12th. And so that's right now when I'm filming this. And, that also doesn't mean that every doe on the whole landscape is getting bred on the same day. It doesn't work that way. I read one study where I believe only up to 20% of the does are actually in estrus and receptive to breeding at any given one moment. So for every 5 does on the landscape, only one of them is actually in estrus at any given time. So lots to pull apart here and think about, but if I were still hunting, and I'm not, I was actually lucky enough to punch my tag already this year on a nice 8-pointer with my bow. But the strategy that I'd be thinking about right now is, less focus on my real remote rut funnels that are way out in the middle of nowhere on some lonely swamp island, that I use in more of that ramp up to the main rut, say in that October 31st, Halloween through the first week in November. I'm more focused on that solo daylight cruising buck back in some secure rut funnel where he's just going cross country from doe zone A to doe zone B way over here, and he's got to cover ground to get in between those two doe zones. That's my strategy in more of that first week in November, last few days of October. As we get into this peak breeding, like where we're at right now, and as we've seen on the graph where those photos start to really drop off, I'm switching my focus from those real remote rut funnels into more of a doe zone area or a doe related area. There's other factors at play here. Right now here in Minnesota, the gun season's been open now for 3-4 days. I open on the 9th. And so I'm thinking about hunting pressure. That's really important to me, trying to find those areas where they haven't been completely shell-shocked and had the Orange Army come driving, pushing through cover and walking all over the place. We sell about 500,000 rifle tags every year, or rifle hunting licenses. So in our state where we're at here in Minnesota, really high hunting pressure. It's center fire rifles allowed throughout most of the state. Gets absolutely pounded during the rifle season. So I'm thinking about that pressure. There's some shotgun zones and things down in the southern part of the state. But so think about where that pressure is and then where it's not. So as we get into right now that top peak of the breeding bell curve, and then even coming down the back slope side of it, November 13, 14, 15 through maybe like the 18th, as we're kind of riding the back side of the bell curve down, I want to be in a doe zone area where I know I'm going to have an opportunity at a buck who's right in with those does, which these areas are not easy to find, especially on public land, because what I found is typically if you find an area with a lot of does on public land, more often than not, it's easy to get to for other public land hunters. It's easy access. So that's why you'll see me typically, in that last few days of October, first week in November, I'm out in some real remote swamp island, tough to access funnel where that mature buck feels safe going through there in the daytime. As you get to more of that doe zone related area, meaning those areas where there's a food plot nearby on private land, maybe there's a bunch of ag fields or alfalfa or something on private land, that's where all the does are going to be hanging out. But that typically means it's on some high ground landmass that's going to have a four-wheeler trail going to it, or some kind of roaded access for other hunters to get to, which is an area that I tend to just steer clear of because it's just hard to target older age class bucks in a scenario where you're bumping elbows with a bunch of other hunters. It's just so difficult to do that. But so if you have some areas like that on public land that you can think of, and one sure way to know that is well, either through historical observations or like, are you getting those does on camera right now on your cell cams, on your traditional cams, whatever that may be. It's a great way to tell you there's does in this area. On some of my more real remote kind of, let's call it a real remote swamp island surrounded by a wet swamp, or really difficult to access areas that you got to go through a wet swamp, or areas where there typically aren't deer throughout the year. If I have a mock scrape in some of those areas, they'll get used by those roaming bucks that are going from doe zone A to doe zone B cross country. They'll stop and hit my mock scrape on the way through the rut funnel. But then this time of year, they almost completely stop using them, or it totally shuts off during that peak of the breeding bell curve. The caveat to that is in those areas where I'm in the doe zone, so say the bedding area right adjacent to a big food source of some sort, or like in the example of northeastern Minnesota, in the real big woods, forested public land regions where we gun hunt up in northeastern Minnesota, I will still get bucks and does using my mock scrapes if that's where the does want to be in general. So I hope that makes sense. There's kind of two different classes of stands I have. Those real remote spots that deer really aren't in most of the year, and that buck is just using it to go long range cross country traveling from a clear cut to a food plot on private land, and there's a swamp island in the middle. That's kind of one class of stands where there aren't many deer year round. Then the other is I'm in the doe zone itself, whether that be a good clear cut that's full of droppings and trails and tracks, or, again, adjacent to some private land crop field or food plot or something like that. So a little bit of a difference there in how I approach my stands. But so like in northeastern Minnesota, for example, in one of my real good rut stands, just today when I'm filming this video, again, it's November 11th, I had, I think, 2 different does come in and interact with and check out my mock scrape. It's incredible. So that's a spot that I would absolutely be hunting right now. If I'm getting does on that mock scrape in November 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, that's where I'm hunting, because those bucks are just going to be doing hot laps through there, in and around, in and amongst those does, stopping by, checking that scrape. But again, those real remote spots where there are no does out in the middle of a lonely swamp island, I'm not getting pictures of does. Typically, I see the bucks just completely abandon those mock scrapes at this point in time. So that's kind of some strategy for you guys to mull and ponder. Let me know what you guys are seeing out there around the country where you're at in your state. And if you're still out there grinding, good luck. I know the feeling. I've eaten tag soup plenty of years myself. So best of luck. I hope these strategies help you guys, and take care until the next video, and I will see you guys then.